Here's some candy for...
How about a bumper sandwich, booger lips?
Happy Meal pails to hold your Halloween goodies, each with a cookie cutter lid, one with each Happy Meal.
I got a quarter. I got a rock.
Happy Halloween, Monsters! And yeah, are you ready for all the spooks and shivers that Halloween has to offer? Because on Halloween night, the ghosts and ghouls, witches and skeletons love to come out and play tricks. And even though here we love to play tricks, we'll first start with a few treats. Because for tonight, Halloween night, just for a special treat for you monsters, we have 6 scary stories for you to listen to on Halloween. So make sure to lock your doors, close the curtains, grab your bag of candy, and let the stories begin.
"4 months ago, my Uncle Warren, who had been very sick, had passed away. I was contacted shortly after by his lawyer, stating that my uncle had written me in his will. This came as a shock to me since I hadn't spoke to him in over 3 years. What came as a greater shock was that he had left me his house. Although he loved kids, Uncle Warren had no children of his own. His wife had died when they were both very young in their early 20s, and he just never remarried. He was a bit old-fashioned in that way. I recalled my dad telling me that my Aunt Maggie had died from the flu or something to that extent. She had suddenly fallen ill and never recovered. I was just a small child when I heard this, so I didn't ask questions or felt the need to bring it up ever again. So I always had a soft spot for my uncle who lived alone. After signing a mountain of papers, I was given the house key. I decided to drive over and take a look at the property, even though it was already getting pretty late in the day. My uncle's house is at the end of a cul-de-sac in a small neighborhood. The 2-story house nearly blends in with the rest of the cookie-cutter residences, only it is in a desperate need of a paint job. I don't remember it ever looking so grim, with the exposed boards under the white-chipped paint covering the house. I suppose everything looks a bit grim when someone close to you dies. As I enter the house, a tidal wave of memories hit me. I look over at the upright piano and remember Uncle Warren teaching me chopsticks and the Blue Danube. It was almost as if I could see us sitting elbow to elbow on the bench, taking turns. I feel guilty that I haven't visited him before he passed. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. His nurse was with him, so at least he wasn't alone in his final moments. My dad had filled me in with how my Uncle Warren had been bedridden in his few remaining months. I knew there was a cleaning lady, Miss Harper, who would come once a week to tidy up, so it didn't surprise me to see every room in the house look clean and orderly. However, the same could not be said about the basement. How could I forget the basement? It was the one floor of the house I was not allowed to set foot in. It gave me the creeps, so I had no problem following that rule. As a kid, I had an overactive imagination, so I would imagine monsters living under the rickety stairs leading down to the dark, dank basement, ready to reach out and grab my ankle if I dared to cross the threshold. I could have sworn I heard a ghost once when I was about 10 years old. It sounded like a small child crying. The crying seemed to be muffled like it was trapped in the walls and wanted out. It had scared me so bad that I bolted up the stairs and tripped and skinned my knee. My dad had scolded me about not going through Uncle Warden's things. My uncle had told me not to ever go down there because not only was it dimly lit, but I could hurt myself with the gardening tools that were scattered throughout the room. Needless to say, it took me a moment to build up the courage to look around the basement. Once I made it to the bottom of the stairs with my ankles still intact, I reached for the one light switch that hung from the ceiling and pulled. The light worked, but it was still very dim and hard to get a good look around. Luckily, I found a decent flashlight sitting next to the bottom step. At first glance, It looked like a typical basement full of junk. There are several gardening tools, drills, firework, unmarked boxes, some old furniture that had seen better days, and a large antique trunk. I guess my overactive imagination hadn't changed that much since my adolescence, since my first thought when I see the trunk goes straight to pirate treasure. It's locked, of course, and I don't see a key anywhere in sight, so I use a shovel on the lock. It surprisingly breaks the lock with just a few attempts, as if it wanted me to open it. Unfortunately, it was not treasure. The trunk is full of photos, newspaper clippings, VHS tapes, clothes, and one small key. It's not until I hold up the flashlight and start reading that I discover things I never knew about my uncle. The photos were of Uncle Warren dressed as a clown at a carnival. He was surrounded by a handful of smiling kids with all their balloons and cotton candy. The back of the first photo was dated 1964 and had Charlie's Chuckles written next to it. I never knew he worked at a carnival. This wasn't long before he must have met Aunt Maggie. I always had a fear of clowns, so my dad must have told Uncle Warren to never show me these. Seeing him so happy in the pictures brought me unexpected sadness. This was all proof that there was a side to Uncle Warren I knew nothing about. I keep shuffling through the trunk when I notice one of the newspaper headlines read, 6 children missing from Ottawa County. I scan the page trying to let every word sink in as fast as my eyes will read them. There had been 6 children to go missing in the span of 8 months, 1964 to 65. All of them were from the ages 4 and 10. Why would my uncle keep this? I wondered if he knew the kids that went missing. He loved kids, and they loved him too. He always knew how to make everyone laugh with his silly jokes and pranks. There's no way he could have been involved with any of this. I pick up more newspaper clippings and see that most have something to do with missing children. I start to pick up some clothes and finally feel lightheaded and sick. They are all children's clothes. At least a dozen dirty, rumpled pairs of kids' clothes and shoes, with the exception of one large outfit. It's Uncle Warren's Charlie Chuckles costume. I am thoroughly creeped out and slam the trunk closed and shove it against the wall. Only when it hits the wall it makes a thunk sound. I make a stupid decision to investigate the wall behind the trunk. Sliding the trunk over reveals a small door in the wall clearly hidden by wallpaper pattern. I look around the room and notice it's the only wall to have wallpaper on it. There is a small keyhole but no door handle. Reading a lot of detective novels sparked a solution to the puzzle before me. I open the trunk and dig for the small key that has to be the one for this door. It fits and clicks, and the door pops open from the wall like a hidden bookcase. Behind the door, there's a small tunnel that looks like it goes all the way underneath the house. I have a hunch on what I'm gonna find and pray that I'm wrong as I scoop myself in. I'm only about 5 or 6 feet in when I see the tunnel branches off into shorter dead-end tunnels. I stop at the first one and see a mound of dirt. I crawl into the tunnel next to that one and see it too has a small mound of dirt. I checked one more time to see if it was like the others. I reach in the dirt and start scattering it about until I feel something hard, like a rock under my hand. It has to be a bone. I lose any courage I had and crawl out of there as fast as I could. I beelined straight to my friend's house and told her everything I saw and asked if I should call the police. My friend, who is much braver than me, tells me not to call the police just yet. Natalie knew my uncle too and couldn't believe it. She suggests that before we get the police involved, we go back and look at the VHS tapes in the trunk, and thoroughly look into the dirt mounds in the tunnels. I think I would feel better if she did this with me. Maybe I'll go back soon. I think I'm just still in shock finding Uncle Warren's secret.
It's been a long 48 hours or so. The next few days may even be longer. Let me start by explaining some of my situation so that you can understand everything better. I'll start with my girlfriend, as stuff kind of revolves around her. My girlfriend's name is Sugumi, though she casually goes by Sue to keep it short. If it isn't clear, she's Japanese American, third generation, pure Japanese ancestry. Her family's story is rather romantic, but I'll try to keep it short. Her grandparents on both sides came to America during World War II, as they were young and delusioned with Japan's ideology. The two married couples, who had all known each other for quite some time and were good friends, knew that coming to America would be a struggle, as they'd be subject to suspicion and poor treatment at first. They just couldn't stand what was happening in Japan, though. As you can guess, their treatment was rather cruel at first, but the war ended and they moved on knowing they could move on, and settled in my hometown. My hometown is a nice place. It's not huge, but it's small. It has a population of 70,000 to 120,000 depending on how you look at things. Discrimination has never been a big thing here. It's rather accepting community, and that's why Sue's grandparents settled here after hearing about it from others, and both couples started families. Sue's parents grew up together through all their youth and just naturally fell in love with each other, and thus they got married, and Sue happened. Moving on now, the house I lived in since I was born, that my parents built, used to be in the far southwest corner of the town. Now, while it still kind of is when looking at the metro area, the city limits have expanded way far out east and somewhat south. Sue's parents both work and make good money. They were able to build a house in a nice neighborhood that's rather new, about a 5-minute drive east on a 2-lane country road that's a few blocks south of my neighborhood. That's the key part of what I'm finally close to telling you. The house is rather big, as along with the money Sue's parents made, both sets of her grandparents helped with the building too, as they kept the tradition from Japan of living as a bigger family. It all works out well since her grandparents are all friends as well. There's touches of Japanese culture incorporated. My favorite thing is the faux koi pond they have. They don't actually have koi fish, but it's still a beautiful little pond. I'm getting off on a tangent now though. I've said enough where I could finally move on to start the insanity. Yesterday, when I was at a local bookstore reserving a copy of Monster Girl Encyclopedia Volume 1, yeah, I'm kind of an otaku, but my interest in the culture is what brought Sue and me together. Anyways, as I got in the car, I got a call from Sue asking if I wouldn't mind coming and spending the night at her place, as there were rumors floating around the neighborhood that some creepy creatures were being spotted. I'm only 5'7" and 140 pounds, but I'm still bigger than Sue and everyone in her family, so I figured she, and possibly her family, would feel more comfortable with someone bigger and stronger around. So I had no objections, as I loved their house and the family. It would put my love's mind at ease, and since I figured it was just some stupid teenagers in the neighborhood joining in on the stupid clown craze, I wasn't worried anything could happen, and that I'd maybe get to have some nice quality time with Sue, if you catch my drift. Fear's a unique thing that can terrify and arouse you at the same time. It puts the thrill of life in you when you realize you're safe. As I hung up the phone while sitting in my car, I noticed that in the parking lot of this big shopping complex the bookstore is located at, there were very few unmarked white moving style trucks in the line, and for some reason the driver of the second one was getting out of the truck and running to the back of the first one. Looking closer, I could see the back was slightly open with something hanging out. It looked somewhat like a thin horse leg, but was all slimy and bumpy. It got quickly shoved back into the truck, and the back was secured before they drove off. I shrugged the incident off as me not seeing things well, as they were a ways away. and that I had monster stuff on my brain because of the book I just reserved and Halloween being so close. I got home and started packing an overnight bag for a few nights in case I stayed longer, and as I packed, I slowly started remembering I had seen a lot of trucks in those parking lots around town lately. It seemed somewhat weird, but again, I shrugged it off. I ate dinner with my parents, said see you later to my pet rabbit, and headed out of her place around 7:30 to 8. I couldn't honestly tell you the exact time. Time's all messed up now. It was dark and traffic had slowed down to a considerable amount. Most of the people my way were already home for the night, enjoying time with their families. I got onto this 2-lane road after a bit and started to drive to Sue's place. It was a while before I realized that I had gone through 5 songs on the CD in my car and still wasn't at Sue's. I know I didn't miss the neighborhood as it's a decent sized and well marked. I pulled over and tried calling her to let her know that I think I got absorbed in the music and got on the wrong road south of my place. Something definitely started feeling off, however, when I just got static on my phone once I dialed her number. Phones don't really work that way anymore. Hanging up and ready to try again, I was thinking it was just a fluke. But then I noticed that my phone's clock said it was 7:35. That couldn't be right, as I know the earliest I left was 7:30, and 5 full-length songs don't go by in 5 minutes. Getting flustered and agitated, I started driving again, hoping somehow things would just get sorted out. Nothing was making sense and my senses were starting to feel hazy. I swear I think that's the reason I didn't notice it until it was too late and I smashed the front of my car right into it. It all happened what seemed like so fast, and I suddenly had what looked like hooves through my windshield. Growing up where I have, anyone that does regular driving in the country knows how to handle hitting a deer. I quickly slid my seat back as far as it would go in case the creature started kicking, and then I got out and went to the back driver's side seat. Looking at my phone, the time now said 8:15, which again didn't make any sense, but I was able to place a call and called the police to come to the scene. They said that an officer was on the southeast area of town doing routine speed checks, and that they'd send him out right away, and that it would be about 10 minutes. Hanging up, I just looked at what I had hit from the back seat. It definitely looked like a deer of sorts. The legs appeared to match, and I noticed that there wasn't any fur on it though, and the skin looked all splotchy and uneven, like there were even small boils all over it. Thinking it must be sick or something nasty to do that, I started thinking I may have to put it out of its misery. But then I noticed the hooves, or what looked like hooves. They were the same shape and size of hooves, except there were extra lines on them, making it almost look like a clenched fist, just with the same material as a hoof. Suddenly, the creature went limp and the hooves, they relaxed, like they actually unfolded like you would unfold your fist when you open your hand. I suddenly saw massive claws on the end of the fingers that made up the hooves. Obviously, they weren't actually hooves. I heard a knock on the window next to me after seeing these hooves open up, and the officer was there already. I could have sworn it hadn't been more than a couple minutes since I called 911. I cracked the window and talked to the officer. I can't remember what exactly we said to each other, but I was confident he was really an officer and his car looked legit. Stepping out, he asked me a few questions and, just for the record's sake, took a breathalyzer test. Everything on my end checked out just okay, so we started to approach the creature slowly. The officer had his gun drawn in case it started kicking, but it didn't move any. It looked limp all over, so we got near it to look at it one last time before pulling it out of my car's windshield and off the surprisingly in-shape hood. There's only one thing I can remember that officer saying from last night, and it's this. "Man, that is one huge deer you hit. I'm surprised the front of your car isn't totaled." Now, I can remember that line so clearly because of one thing. Whatever I had hit, it was not a deer. Sure, it somewhat shared the same body shape of one and had antlers, but everything else about it was different. Heck, calling the things antlers is quite a stretch. Just so you know where they were, the antlers were spasming back and forth between being rigid and flaccid, and they definitely weren't a hard material of any kind. They were slimy and clearly noticeable from the sheen of the moisture on them, and had giant pores of varying sizes on them, pulsing like a fish's mouth, gasping for breath out of the water. The boils I had seen on the legs were just about everywhere else that the pores weren't, and there were 3 of them, all disgusting to even look at. The head they were on wasn't any better. Can you imagine what a head that's a mixture of a human, moose, deer, and horse's head would look like? It's rather hard for me to even remember. The cranium of the skull looked as if it was a deer's, and it looked like someone fused the front half of a horse's skull onto the deer cranium, making it an oblong obscenity of nature. Except the end of the snout, which clearly looked like a moose's, with the same puffy, round look. Where does the human part fit in here? Well, the face was more like a human's than anything else. The eyes, all 4 of them, were on the front of the skull, not the side, and the mouth had clearly the same curve and color as that of a human's, just at the end of the snout. It's hard to tell what exactly covered all that bone though, as it wasn't skin and it certainly wasn't fur. It was like some nasty amalgamation of the two. It looked like soft skin that was in strands like fur would be. It was just wiggling on its own, like it had its own sentient mind, each and every strand. All 4 of the legs looked the same, although it appeared the creature can go back and forth between being a quadruped and a bipedal. I couldn't see the front of the torso well, only the back, but it was covered in a mixture of fur skin from its head to the bulging boils of its legs. I turned towards the officer, wanting to ask him what kind of deer he knew to think that this was some sort of deer. When I was facing him, before I could ask, he told me something along the lines of that I needed to take care of my car better, and that it was almost not street legal. Wondering what the heck he meant since I take great care of it, I turned around to look at it and the creature was gone. All that remained was a small dent on the hood and a busted windshield. I was terrified. I just wanted to put this incident behind me and get away from here. The officer said he was going to leave, and I had plans to get to Sue's and lock the house down just to watch some stupid, happy, sweet movies in the basement with her. Luckily, that was able to transpire. I was able to get to her place with ease, and I left the scene of the incident. But what I saw before leaving is what will stay with me no matter how many sweet, sappy movies I try to sponge my brain with. I watched the officer make his way back to his car. As he turned to face me to get into the cruiser, that creature was suddenly behind him. I don't know how or why, but it was. The officer looked at me and gave me a nod, and as his head fell, a huge clawed, hoof-like appendage was sticking out of his abdomen, straight through from behind, with his intestines hanging between the clawed fingers, like you'd see pumpkin guts covering a child's hand as they were making a jack-o'-lantern. There was even a pillar of white mixed in with the guts, what I can only assume was the officer's spine. As I was frozen in place for a second, mouth agape, the creature's equine-like head opened its mouth, and staring straight at me said one word in the most terrifying, gravely guttural tone I've ever heard. Enjoy.
Enjoy.
I jumped in the back of my car and sped off, the image of the impaled officer's body standing visible in my mirror for maybe 10 seconds before I was too far away. But in those 10 seconds, I noticed the creature wasn't anywhere to be seen.
I can barely type this properly. My hands are shaking too much for proper typing. Why are my hands shaking? Good question. Well, I need to tell someone. I don't know if anyone else will listen. I was just released from a psychiatric hospital and I might lose my credibility with many of you, but please, hear me out. I go to school at Cornell University. Well, I used to. I was dismissed due to my psychotic episode, as if no mental illness was running in my family and there was nothing to make me snap. I'm not crazy. No one believes me, that's all. Their minds are too small compared to the things I have seen and still see, but please hear me out. As I said, I used to go to Cornell University. I loved it. It was beautiful there. It was fall. It was also a Tuesday. The leaves were changing to their beautiful red, orange and brown shades. I was sitting on the cafe's patio. I was sipping a cup of coffee during the morning, watching the leaves fall and the sun rising. It was my favourite view. The cafe wasn't very good. The coffee was decent at best, but it sat on a hill and stood above the campus and city. Also, not many other coffee shops were open this early. Anyways, I pick up my cup to take another sip. Before my mug touched my lips, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Let me tell you, the only other people that were normally up at that cafe were the workers, and they always left me to my own device. So it startled me, okay? No judging. Anyways, I jumped and hot coffee spilled all over my lap. I quickly grabbed a handful of napkins and began to wipe off the coffee after my initial shock. Then, I was pissed. I looked up and saw a man that I didn't recognise. This man was skinny, as if he had scarcely eaten over the course of maybe a month. He sported a dark, bushy beard. It was very messy and uneven, as if he hadn't shaved for weeks. His clothes were filthy and torn. His sleeves were ripped up and there was a spot of blood on his collar. He looked not homeless, but on the run. He had a crazy look in his eyes. But there was something else. Hope. I was confused by his gaze, but I quickly composed myself. It's been following me for weeks. It doesn't sleep. It won't stop following me. His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't had a glass of water for days. Help. I was genuinely confused. He gazed back over his shoulder and briskly walked off about 10 paces away. He looked back at me, then down the road, then he began to laugh. I had no idea why this man interacted with me or why he just walked off like he did. It's a miracle, he shouted. It has never looked at anyone else, but now, he pointed to the empty air, laughing again. Okay, now I was mad again. Look, you spilt my coffee and I was trying to be nice, but now you owe me another cup. His eyes turned tearful again and he talked down the street. I had a choice. I could run up and catch up with him, or I could go to class and pretend nothing happened. I chose the former. I ran after the stranger. I wasn't going to beat him, hell, I wasn't even going to lay a hand on him. I just wanted to scare him. He was fast though. He outran me and ducked into an alley, disappearing from sight. I got there 30 seconds later and turned into the alley, cursing myself for being so slow. It turned out I didn't need to speed up. I saw the man. He was suspended 20 feet above the ground, pinned fast to the side of a building, nothing holding him. He was screaming, swinging his fists into the empty air. Whatever it was holding him up was sort of like something out of focus in a photograph. It was large, I can tell you that much. Slowly things began to focus. The man was screaming still, but his voice was going out, becoming more and more strange as he spoke. The thing was still blurry but clearer. It was larger than I thought. It was 20 or 30 feet tall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was some white cave-dwelling creature or something that I was looking at. It started to come into sight. The thing was mostly in focus now. Only the face was still blurred. The hands on the things were relatively large compared to its size, and they were tipped with claws that resembled glass. Even the muscle of the thing was very dominant, not necessarily bulging or huge, but very distinct and lean, intimidating. I stared at the thing, paralysed in fear. I couldn't run away or even look away. I was aware of my shaking, but I couldn't do anything about it. The man screamed once again. It then tilted its head as if it enjoyed the sound. Slowly, its face cracked. Then it fucking split open like a blossoming flower into 6 distinct pieces of flesh lined with teeth. What I thought was still blurred was actually clear. The thing didn't have a face. The milky white skin was just of that, smooth and flat. The thing then lunged its head towards the man and closed its jaws. The man's screams were silent. I watched in horror as the thing pulled its head away from where the man had been. Blood covered him and covered the wall where he was pinned to. It ate its own fucking hand. The blood stopped quickly though, which was good because I was about to pass out, if there was any more. It looked at its stump of a hand and turned its head as if wondering where it went. Soon another hand was in its place. Okay, I would like to say I heroically retreated or some lie like that, but truth be told I was scared. I screamed. I finally found my voice and let loose the highest, girliest scream I could. Then the worst part happened. The creature turned towards me as its face cracked again into a smile. A fucking smile. It let loose a scream, incredibly loud and powerful. I could feel my entire skeleton shake and vibrating from it. I don't remember anything after that. I woke up on the ground in the alley an hour later. I didn't go to class that day. Instead, I went to my dorm and sat on my bed staring out at the trees. I fell asleep at some point and woke up to seemingly nothing. I looked out my window and saw it. The thing was sitting on a roof, a deer carcass in hand, half eaten. It was transfixed at my window. My roommate later found me in the room, cowering in the bathroom. I was crying and pointing over towards the conjuring room's window. He saw nothing and finally coaxed me out of the bathroom into the bedroom. It was closer now, but still there. I went crazy shouting, "You lied, man!" He contacted 911 and told them I was having a nervous breakdown. I was then checked into a mental hospital. Then I saw it again looking at me through the windows. I began ignoring the sight of it just to get out of there. I left this morning. It followed me the entire way. Now I'm writing this on my computer. It's staring through my window right at me. It's never been this close. I feel like it's my time. Please remember me. And if you see it, try and find a way to get rid of it, please. For anyone else that might endure this torture, goodbye. I hope it's quick.
This really freaked me out. Yesterday I noticed that my neighbor hadn't put out any of his Halloween decorations or lights, etc. The past 2 years I've lived next to him, he's gone all out for Halloween. I don't know him well. He's younger, single, but I know he likes kids, not in a creepy way. His brother and sister-in-law and their kids always visit him, and he plays with his 3 young nieces and nephews out in the yard. So anyway, I got home from work and was walking up my driveway, and I saw him outside and said something like, "Hey man, you better get your Halloween stuff up or that house up the street is going to beat you for best decorations." He kind of smiles sheepishly and says he's actually going to keep his house dark this year and just put out candy. I asked if he was going out of town, but he said no. Something happened last year that really scared him. Now I was concerned for my own safety if some weirdos were coming around our neighborhood, which is a pretty safe neighborhood with tons of young families living here. So I asked him what happened. He said last year he had his brother's family over so they could trick-or-treat in the neighborhood, since they live in an apartment complex that doesn't do much for Halloween. He had a bunch of kids come to the door like always. His family took off around 10:30, and there were only a few older trick-or-treaters, but by 11:30, they were pretty much done. So he was inside watching TV when the doorbell rings. He grabs the candy bowl and heads over, noticing that it's a little past midnight, and that's pretty rude for trick-or-treaters to still be out, but notices he hadn't turned off all his decoration lights yet, so his house is still a beacon. He swings the door open and is about to yell something to freak them out, but stops dead when he sees the kids at the door. He said one was possibly around 13 to 14 years of age, and the other was maybe around 16 or 17. Both were boys. They weren't dressed up, but he remembers the older one was wearing a flannel checkered shirt. He was immediately overcome with uneasiness, like opening the door was a huge mistake. They just stared at him, and he noticed they had really big irises and dilated pupils. He couldn't even see the whites of their eyes, so he figured they must have been contact lenses. He was frozen there, holding the candy bowl, like he couldn't slam the door in their face as much as he wanted to. So he nervously tried to smile at them, hoping they would break character and ask for candy or something. The younger one said they had gotten lost and needed to come in and use his phone. That's when he closed the door more than halfway on them and said, "No, sorry." The older one then said, "Can we just wait in your house until our parents come get us?" But by then, he was convinced that his life was in danger and the kids must be high on something or intending to rob him, and just kept mumbling, "No, sorry, good night," as he inched the door closed and locked it. He told me he was so fucking scared at that point that they were going to try to break in through one of his windows or something. But he looked through his peephole and they turned around slowly and left. He sat back down to watch TV at a really low volume so he could hear any sounds. And he said he stayed up until about 5 a.m. because he was too scared to go to bed and drop his guard. The whole time he was telling me this, I was thinking that this sounds really familiar, just like the Black-Eyed Kids urban legend. Then I thought, hey, maybe this dude is trying to scare me because after all, he does have the Halloween spirit. So I'm looking at him incredulously, but trying not to seem too gullible. So I said, "Man, that's really crazy. Sounds like the Black-Eyed Kids." He just looks at me blankly. "The what? Is that a movie or something?" I said no, but told him to look it up online. About an hour later, I get a knock on my door, and admittedly, I almost jump out of my skin, thinking it might be a demon child. It was my neighbor, and his eyes were huge. He swears to me up and down that he had never heard of the Black-Eyed Kids before, and it was so similar to what happened to him. So we talked for a while longer, and I told him that quite a few people knew about this urban legend, and it's possible it was just teenagers with black contacts trying to freak people out on Halloween, which would be genius, by the way. But he said the fear he felt was so primal, it came over him the second he opened the door. Anyways, beware. Halloween would definitely be the perfect cover for them.
Three years ago, I was at a Halloween party with some friends. We were drinking by a large bonfire, listening to music and just telling stories that would make us laugh. We decided to tell some ghost stories because what's Halloween without a nice ghost story? I told the classic humans can lick too story, and my friends told various stories that we've all heard before. We went around the circle, each one of us telling a story until it was Dan's turn. John did not want to tell a story. He shook his head, kept saying things like, "Nah man, I'm good," followed by a fake laugh. We egged him on, and eventually he caved. Their family was big, but the house was small. too small actually, as Dan, John, and Zach all shared one room, even when they were in their teens. I couldn't imagine sharing a room with another person, let alone 2 others. He told us about the time he heard a voice coming from the basement, the time he heard footsteps walking up and down the stairs to the basement, and even the time he saw a figure walking through the halls heading down to the basement. That fucking basement, dude. It came back to the fucking basement. Weird noises and the fucking smell could make even the strongest stomach turn over, he said, as his voice was somber. We were all listening closely, leaning in to hear what else he was going to say. I never went down there. Zach never went down there. John never went down there. My fucking dad never went down there. And he was the bravest bastard I ever knew. We all knew his dad, the 5'6" tall brick shit house, who would beat your ass for even looking at him funny. He died about a year ago after this event, but Dan never really showed emotion toward his death. He seemed content with the death, which always kinda worried me. But one thing was for sure, Steve was a scary dude and wasn't afraid of anything. But he was afraid of that basement. Something wasn't adding up right. Listen, all I'm saying is that basement in that house was evil. Pure fucking evil. I'll never step foot in that house again, he said, staring at his feet, shaking his head. I don't like talking about this because to this day I have nightmares about what I heard. I could smell the fear he was exuding through his pores. It was strange, as Dan was always a hard-nosed dude who barely showed any emotion. This was real. It had to be. The story was over. Everyone was quiet. We listened to his words and how fearful he was about the house. We all knew the house he was referring to, the small yellow one on the end of Parrot Street. Is there someone living there now? I asked, honestly intrigued by the thought of someone else there. I think so. I'm not sure. Last I heard, a family of 3 moved in there. Poor fucking bastards. If I were them, I'd get my ass out of there so fast, Dan said as he took a sip of his beer. I had the idea, but I wasn't going to tell anyone. We all camped out and slept for the night, trying to forget the terror that we just heard escape Dan's mouth. I awoke early, the sun was barely out. I left the bonfire to go home, get some breakfast, and try to get more comfortable sleep in my own bed. As I was driving home, I couldn't help but remember what Dan said about the home on Parrot Street. I drove by the house on my way and I slowly drove past, looking at it. It looked harmless. Perhaps it was the dull yellow color that gave it the feel, but it looked harmless. There was a dark blue truck parked in the driveway, as it was clear someone was living there. I parked my car on the side and got out. I had to ask the owners if anything weird happened, or if Dan was just the best liar known to fucking mankind. I knocked on the door as a woman about 27 opened the door. "Can I help you?" she said. I was a bit taken back by her beauty, but this was another man's wife, I assumed, so I had to stop the bad thoughts. "Hello, my name is Vic. I used to live in this house when I was a kid and well, may I come in?" I didn't know what to say. I figured if I lied and said I used to live here, they let me in. I was right. She let me right in. I walked into the home and was immediately greeted with the smell of pumpkin, but there was a stench underneath the sweet aroma that almost made me hold my nose. The pumpkin was masking the smell the best it could, but it wasn't good enough. She walked me over to a couch and offered me something to drink. I declined. "So what is it that you need, Vic?" she asked, seeming a bit confused as to why I was there. "Listen, I'm gonna be honest. Have you experienced anything abnormal here in this house? I heard her swallow her feet. She faked the laugh and took a sip of her coffee. No, not at all. I knew she was lying. I knew it. I faked a laugh myself. Nothing at all? Not even from the basement? I was trying to get an answer from her. Suddenly, out from the kitchen, I heard a voice. It was rugged, deep, and seemed to have been listening to this conversation all along. Honey, just tell them. Don't be ashamed, the voice said as I looked off into the distance to see the husband. He was tall, about 6'6", I would say, and easily 300 pounds of muscle. He looked like a professional wrestler. I was a bit intimidated. Oh, sorry, I haven't introduced myself. The name's Ted, and not what I would have expected by a man of that size. I'm Victor. Well, everyone calls me Vic, I said, as I shook his giant honey-baked ham-sized hand. Good lord, he was big. There's been some scary shit going on here. I don't know why Denna isn't saying anything. Shit. Our own daughter refuses to sleep in her bed. It's been driving us fucking nuts. I hear some fucked up things at night coming from the basement. And the smell. We can't seem to get rid of it. Wait, how did you know? Well, sir, I used to live here, and quite honestly, I wanted to see if what I experienced as a kid was in my head, or something real. It's real, I said, as I continued the lie that this used to be my childhood home. I stopped by because I wanted to ask you for, well, a favor. I wouldn't call it that, but nothing else seems to work. A favor? He said in a puzzled tone. I want to stay here. One night, more specifically, in the basement. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this, but he cut me off. You crazy son of a bitch! You want to stay in the basement overnight? Shit, you have balls, kid. But you must be fucking stupid if you think we're gonna let you stay here by yourself. I don't even know you. This could be a fucking ploy to steal something. And even said I'd stay in the basement while they stayed in their rooms. I paid them $100 of my own money to do it. I don't know why, I was obsessed. He took my money, looked at his wife, and nodded. Alright, kid. See what you can find down there. But just know, I'm not going down there for anything. He was clear I was on my own. He said he's never been down there and never will, just like Dan's dad said. We shook hands, and surprisingly, they offered me dinner before. We all sat down and ate a nice spaghetti dinner, but it was awkward. I barely said a word, and I could barely eat, but I forced myself to seem not rude to their cooking. It was delicious spaghetti, don't get me wrong, but I was nervous for the night. Their daughter was 9 years old, the cutest little thing you have ever seen. She was quiet, perhaps because I was a stranger, but she seemed very strange. Ted patted her on their back and told her to get ready for bed. She slowly walked upstairs, but I noticed that when she walked past the basement, she walked faster. Something was definitely up with that fucking basement. I turned back to Dan and Denna. Something is going on down there and I want to help. It fucked me up as a kid and it's fucking you up and your daughter. Whatever I find, I think you should leave. Something just doesn't feel right and I am legitimately concerned, I said. Softly, their daughter could not hear me. I was concerned for their safety and I legitimately felt this home was evil. I could feel it. Denna didn't say a word to me, but Ted nodded his head. I offered to do the dishes, but Denna insisted. I'm overly courteous as a guest and wanted to thank them for the warm hospitality and the delicious meal I forced myself to eat. It was nearly 8 o'clock, and it was time for me to head down to the basement. Fuck. I wasn't looking forward to this. I brought my cell phone, my portable charger just in case, and an iPod to help me sleep if I could. I opened the door to the basement and looked down the narrow stairs that looked like they were ready to give out. I noticed something that sent chills down my spine. There were footprints on the steps leading down to the bottom. I turned my head toward Ted and Denna on the couch, who weren't watching television, but rather staring at me. "Has anyone been down here recently?" I asked, looking back down. They shook their head no, but the footprints looked fresh. I swallowed my fear and slowly walked down the steps. The steps made this horrible sound with every step. I took my time, as I could tell these steps were not fit to be walked on. I saw the light switch at the bottom of the stairs and I flipped it, but it didn't work. Imagine that. I was in the basement and it was cold, very cold. There was no insulation at all, even on this brutally hot summer night that it was. I looked around at my surroundings and noticed that everything was covered in dust. Well, almost everything. In the corner was an old wicker chair that seemed to be absent of dust. How could that be? It didn't make any fucking sense to me. I looked around a bit and noticed that the basement broke off into a different part with a doorway separating it. There was no door, but rather just a hole. I walked slowly, wiping away all the cobwebs that there were, and I entered the second part of the basement. What I saw gave me fucking chills. There, in the middle of the room, was a mattress. The mattress was stained, disheveled, and completely torn. Someone was fucking living here, but there was no sign of whoever it was. I immediately turned around to back up the stairs, but was stopped in my tracks by a strange man who immediately covered my mouth and put his index finger to my lips. "Shh," he said. His breath was one of the worst smells I've ever smelled. I pushed him away and ran up the stairs as fast as I could, slammed the door shut, and stared at Ted and Dana. They got up from the couch and approached me, obviously worried. "Grab your daughter and get the fuck out of here. Now! There's someone living down there." "What? Someone is in the basement? Jesus Christ, I'm gonna fucking kill them." "Live in this house, my house, and scare my daughter?" Ted pushed me out of the way and walked down the steps. I tried to stop him, but to no avail. He made his way down there and looked around and started yelling, "Where are you, you son of a bitch? Come out!" Dana looked concerned. I was too. I walked down there too. I walked down and I met up with Ted and I looked around, but the old man was gone. I showed Ted the place where the mattress was, but to my surprise, it was gone. It was like everything up and disappeared. Ted looked at me, pissed off. "What is this? Some sort of fucking joke? There isn't anyone here. Get the fuck out of my house. How dare you scare us like that? Get out before I knock your dick in the dirt." It didn't make sense. Where was the old man? Where did he go? I apologized, but Ted wasn't having it. I made my way up the stairs and out the door and didn't look back. Did I just imagine everything? It was all so fucking real. The smell, The mattress? The old man? I opened the door to leave, but I was stopped by a tug at my shirt. It was their daughter, Julie. "Don't be afraid. Frank is a nice guy." Frank? Who the fuck is Frank? My eyes were wide. I was scared. She told me to come down to her level. She motioned with her index finger to come closer. I took a knee, but it wasn't close enough. Closer. She motioned until finally, I was almost nose to nose with her. She placed her index finger on my lips. "Shh," she said, just as the old man did. She winked. I ran and never looked back. I will never go back to that home again.
Monster. When you hear that word, what comes to mind? My guess is that it would be something grotesque. Even more likely, something that isn't human. But that's wrong. Monsters aren't something of fiction, but they also aren't the thing you imagine. In fact, you are living among them without so much as a thought. The things that are the real monsters are humans. Before you try to correct me, before you try to tell me that humans have done many wonderful things, stop. Not all of the human race is bad, no, but many of us are. Us humans, we like to make people feel pain for our pleasure. We're racist, sexist monsters. We do horrible things. I myself did not realize this, not until recently at least. I moved into a royal town last month. My mother and father had both gotten into a car accident and I needed to get away from all of the memories of the town. But that's beside the point. I had just gotten settled down into my small house when I had decided to go and say hi to my new neighbors. Again, it was a royal town, so there weren't very many people, about 300 or so, and I figured I might as well get acquainted with a few of them. I stepped outside and for the first time realized the horrible, rancid smell. It was coming from the garage that the people next door owned, and as I got closer, it grew stronger. I persevered, covering my nose the best I could, and approached the door, knocking on it, and quickly uncovering my nose, trying to breathe through only my mouth. A little old lady answered the door, and I forced a smile, still trying to ignore the odor. "Hello, I'm your new neighbor." I held my hand out for her to shake and she took it. I suppressed a shudder. Her hand felt leathery and rough. "Hello, dear. My name is Othelia. It's nice to have new neighbors. There hasn't been anyone in that house for a long time." Her thin lips stretched into a saggy smile, and I winced, seeing what little teeth she had left. "Well, I just wanted to ask you why your garage smells so strange. Did you need help cleaning anything out of it? I'd be happy to offer my service." "I would love that, you handsome young man. I could use some muscle. There's a dead raccoon in there, and it's stuck behind a shelf that I can't move. How about tomorrow afternoon? I'll make you some lunch, and you can get that raccoon out of my garage." I nodded and exchanged a few more words with her before leaving, nauseous, but glad I was going to be able to get rid of that smell the next day. When noon arrived, I walked over to her house and found her sitting on her porch in a wicker rocking chair. She gestured to the other seat and offered me a glass of lemonade, which I thought was weird, considering I hadn't even started working, but I accepted the drink. She talked with me for a bit, began feeling a little tired. I figured it was just the day's heat, so I stood up. "I guess I'll go get that raccoon for you now, miss." I pulled out a pair of rubber gloves from my pocket and unfolded the plastic trash bag. She also stood up and pulled a pair of keys out from her pocket and ushered me down the porch steps before following. Her step was a slow hobble. As she unlocked the door for me, I grew dizzy. It wasn't until then that I realized something was wrong. She opened the door for me, and I was about to open my mouth to speak when I felt a weak shove from behind. I fell to the ground inside of the garage with a sickening thud. The door was slammed behind me, and I scrambled as best as I could to open it, but she had already locked it. It was a matter of moments before I passed out. It wasn't even enough time for my eyes to adjust, and I'm almost glad they didn't. When I opened my eyes next, I was being moved. My eyes were blurry and my senses slow, but once I felt the zip ties closing around my wrist, I remembered what had happened before I passed out. I felt someone breathe on my neck as the zip ties were still being tightened, and in self-defense, I swung my head back as hard as I could, feeling the back of my skull make contact with someone's face, hearing a loud crack and a yelp. Whoever it was let go of me, giving me time to scramble away. My hands were tied enough that if I wanted to get them out, I'd have to severely injure my wrists. I looked at my captor in shock. It was Ophelia. Her hands over her bleeding and broken nose, her eyes full of malice and a scowling frown. It wasn't until then that I took time to look around. There were bodies everywhere. Some were hung from meat hooks that dangled off the ceiling, while others carelessly lay on the ground. Some of them had chunks missing, and the smell was even more worse inside of the garage. I vomited all over myself, heaving at the sight and smell of the mangled, dripping bodies around the room. Ophelia was on her feet now, and advancing on me with a large meat cleaver. I knew if I didn't act, I would soon be strung up like the others. I managed to get up without using my hands and backed up against the wall, trying not to slip on the streaks of still wet blood or fall over in any of the scattered limbs and torsos. As she approached, I kicked her hard in her stomach, causing her to fall backwards, and she hit her head on the cement floor hard, knocking her out. The meat cleaver in her hand clattered to the ground. I ran over to the door and began throwing my entire body weight up against it, hurting my shoulder in the process, but finally breaking it open. Once I was free from that hell, I ran as fast as I could to the next house over, screaming for someone to call the police on the way there. The neighbor must have heard, because once I reached her door, she was outside, the phone in her hand, talking to the police. I told her what had happened. I told her about seemingly innocent little Ophelia and her garage as she cut the zip ties away from my wrists. Trying to describe it out loud almost made me vomit again. Once the police arrived, she was kind enough to explain it for me, seeing the distressed look on my face. They found her alive, with a cracked head. They had found 20 people in her garage. All of them had been identified as missing people. Inside the house, they found large freezers that contained more chunks of meat, all human. Ophelia had been a cannibal and confessed to killing 50 people, but I suspected there were more. She was sent to prison for the rest of her life. Humans are monsters. We have enough knowledge to do things like send people to other planets, but deep down, we have primal urges. Sometimes those primal urges win. Monstaz, I really hope you enjoyed the stories. Hopefully they were spooky and creepy enough to get your Halloween spirit going. So get out there, do some trick-or-treating, get a lot of candy, make sure there's no needles or razor blades in it that's gonna slit your esophagus when it's going down your throat. And Monstaz, gotta give big shouts and thanks to a few people who helped make this Halloween special happen. So, big shouts to Unit number 522, Little Moon Mistress, Furigen, Insomniac, and Dark Voices. Monstaz, be sure to show these 5 YouTubers a little love on Halloween, and be sure to give them some treats by checking out their YouTube channels. If you like what you see, make sure you subscribe to them. Definitely some very talented narrators indeed. So Monstaz, make sure not to smash any of those jack-o'-lanterns until after Halloween. And also, with all these clown sightings, make sure if you see one, make sure to walk right up to him and beep his nose. Also, big shouts to all of you. And what's your favorite thing about Halloween? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure to hit that like button. And also, if you're new or haven't done so, why not hit that subscribe button and become a monster today? Alright, well the night is still young. Time to go have a little fun. And happy Halloween to all of you monsters out there. And like always, till next time.
It's a frightful sight to see what goes on Halloween night.